They said the water of the Bosphorus was calm that night. The moon, thin as a blade, hung low over the palace walls, and in the silence between the waves, a muffled cry was swallowed whole. A silk sack, embroidered, immaculate, slipped beneath the dark surface, its burden thrashing once, twice, and then nothing. The sack did not resurface. The woman inside had once ruled the Sultan's heart, her laughter echoing through marble halls gilded with gold and envy. Now, her name was forbidden to be spoken, her portrait burned, her silks divided among rivals who pretended not tremble. The harem forgot her, or pretended to. History calls her by many names, yet her story was never truly written, only whispered. Some say she plotted against the Sultan. Others say she loved him too deeply to survive the court's jealousy. But beneath every account lies a single truth. Power, in the Ottoman palace, was as fragile as breath, and love could become a death sentence. If you could hear the sea that night, would you swear it wasn't whispering her name? Before we begin, remember to like, subscribe, and follow for more real stories that history tried to silence. Tales of love, power, and the price paid for both. Now, let us return to the Gilded Cage of Topkapi Palace, where beauty was a weapon and silence could save or destroy. The morning light in Topkapi Palace did not enter freely. It filtered through lattice windows of carved cedar, breaking into golden fragments upon the marble floors. The air smelled faintly of rosewater and fear. Beyond the courtyard's still fountains, a quiet world stirred, the harem. To outsiders, it was a paradise of silks, jewels, and beauty. But within its walls, paradise had a price. Every smile hid calculation. Every whisper carried danger. Women here were chosen, not for their will, but for how gracefully they could surrender it. At dawn, the concubines rose in silence. They bathed in cool water poured from copper jugs, wrapped themselves in gauze-like robes, and rehearsed the poise that might one day bring them before the Sultan. Some came from distant shores, captured, traded, or gifted as tributes from foreign lands. They spoke in different tongues, prayed to different gods before they were taught to pray anew. In their eyes flickered the same longing to be seen, not as possessions, but as souls. Yet the palace taught them otherwise. A woman's worth was not in her heart, but in how softly it could be disguised. Among them walked a new girl, taller than most, with hair the color of chestnut and eyes that burned like amber at dusk. The others called her the foreign one, whispering she had been taken from the Black Sea coast. Perhaps Georgian or Ruthenian. She said little. When she spoke, her accent curled through Turkish words like wind through silk. The eunuchs watched her closely, not because she disobeyed, but because she didn't flinch. When others bowed, she met the marble floor with her gaze, but not her spirit. There was something defiant in her quiet, a calm that unsettled even the most seasoned attendants. That evening, when the palace musicians played, her voice joined them for the first time. Low, haunting, filled with sorrow she did not name. The melody drifted beyond the lattice, reaching the Sultan's private garden, where he paused mid-thought. Some say it was that note, pure, trembling, that pierced the veil between ruler and captive. Others say destiny had already marked her. The next morning, her name was summoned. When the white eunuch came for her, the air in the corridor turned heavy. The women fell silent, their veils trembling like moth wings. To be summoned to the Sultan's chamber was both a triumph and a threat. For some, it meant the start of a gilded life, their names whispered with reverence and envy. For others, it marked the beginning of a slow erasure, their light consumed by the vast, unfeeling palace. She followed the eunuch through winding hallways scented with amber and smoke. The floors gleamed like still water. Every footstep seemed to echo against the centuries that walked there before. Women once adored, now dust and forgotten tombs. At the threshold of the imperial chamber, she paused. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the fountains outside. The eunuch's eyes, unreadable and ancient, motioned her forward. The doors closed behind her, and silence swallowed the world. The Sultan sat by a brazier, incense curling around him like ghosts of prayers unanswered. He was younger than she expected, though the weight of rule had carved lines into his brow. His gaze was neither cruel nor kind, only distant, as though he were perpetually listening to something no one else could hear. When he spoke, His voice was measured, a blend of command and weariness. "You are the one they call the foreign girl?" She lowered her head. "If it pleases my lord." The faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He gestured for her to rise. That night, he did not ask for music or dance. He asked her to speak. And she did, of her homeland, of snow upon mountains, of the river that froze each winter, and the bells of the monastery that once marked her childhood. Her words painted a world untouched by court intrigue, and the Sultan listened as though remembering what silence used to mean. When dawn came, the eunuchs found her still there, seated beside him, eyes heavy but unbroken. From that night onward, she was no longer merely a concubine. She had become his favorite listener. And in the harem, where envy slept lightly, every woman understood what that meant. Whispers began before the sun fully rose. The days that followed her summons unfolded like a fevered dream. The harem, once a labyrinth of routine and ritual, now revolved around a single absence, hers. Servants whispered that she had been chosen, that the Sultan's gaze lingered too long upon the foreign girl with the quiet eyes. Some spoke her name with envy, others with fear, as though to envy the Sultan's favorite was to tempt fate itself. When she returned, she was not the same. Her silks were a finer weave, her attendants more watchful. The Valide Sultan, mother of the ruler and mistress of all within the palace, observed her from the upper balcony as one might study a viper newly discovered in a garden of roses. There was no open hostility, only the slow tightening of control, a smile too long, a command too soft. Power in Topkapi was never shouted. It was whispered, traded, wrapped in sweetness until it suffocated. Yet the Sultan's favorite seemed untouched by fear. Each evening she was summoned again, not to entertain, but to speak. Sometimes she sang for him, her voice threading through the silence like smoke through prayer. Other times, they said nothing at all, the quiet between them more intimate than words. The Sultan's physicians began to remark that his temper had softened, his appetite for war cooled. He spent hours in the garden now, watching the fountains with her beside him, a cup of sherbet untouched in his hand. But the harem saw more than tenderness. They saw imbalance. Each favor she received, a ring, a pearl comb, a new chamber overlooking the sea, was a stone added to the wall between her and the others. The Sultan's affection, so freely given, became her undoing long before she could see it. In the stillness of night, as she brushed her hair before the mirror, she began to hear the silence behind the palace walls change. It was no longer peaceful. It was listening. The Valide Sultan did not act in haste. She had ruled the palace longer than her son had ruled the empire. Her power was older than affection, sharper than sentiment. While others whispered, she observed. While others envied, she planned. The Sultan's favorite, radiant and naive, had begun to disturb the delicate balance of the harem, a world sustained by silence and obedience. One woman's rise meant another's fall, and in Topkapi, falls were seldom gentle. Rumors, like rot, began to bloom beneath the marble. Some claimed the favorite had bewitched the Sultan, using charms from her homeland. Others swore she poisoned his mind, urging him to favor her kin in foreign lands. Every tale was a needle, each lie carefully stitched by invisible hands. Even the eunuchs, bound by loyalty and fear, found themselves repeating what they could not prove. It did not matter whether it was true. It mattered only that it was heard. The favorite sensed a shift. Her greetings grew colder, her laughter quieter. Once, she might have sung to the halls, her voice filling the courtyards with light. Now she walked in silence, knowing that every step echoed against unseen ears. Still, she did not plead for mercy or protection. Perhaps she believed the Sultan's love could shield her. Perhaps she believed love itself was protection. One evening, as the call to prayer faded over Bosphorus, she sat beside the Sultan beneath the cypress trees. The water reflected the last light of day, trembling like a secret about to be spoken. She asked him softly, "Do you ever fear the silence after call?" He looked at her then, not as a ruler, but as a man suddenly aware of what he could lose. "Silence," he said, "is the only thing the throne cannot command." In the distance, the Valide Sultan watched from behind a curtain of embroidered gauze. Her expression did not change, but her decision was made. The order came in the dead hush between night and dawn, carried not by messenger or decree, but by silence itself. In the harem, silence was never empty. It meant something had already been decided. The eunuchs moved through the corridors like shadows, their slippers making no sound upon the stone. Lamps were dimmed, curtains drawn. The favorite slept in a chamber perfumed with jasmine, her dreams heavy with the sea's slow rhythm. She did not know that men were already waiting beyond her door. They say the Sultan did not speak the words aloud. It was enough that his mother whispered them in his ear, while the muezzin's voice still hung in the air. The favorite had become dangerous. They said, a threat to order, a distraction from duty, perhaps even a curse upon the throne. Her beauty, once the empire's treasure, had turned to poison in the eyes of the court. The Sultan listened, eyes hollow, hands clasped before him. When he gave the smallest nod, the Valai bowed and withdrew. Nothing more needed to be said. The eunuchs entered her chamber just before dawn. One of them, the oldest, paused at the threshold and drew a slow breath. He had carried out this duty before, the silent mercy reserved for those too beloved to be publicly shamed. The velvet sack, soft as sorrow, hung folded over his arm. When he approached her bed, she stirred but did not cry out. Her eyes open, calm, clear, as though she had been expecting them. "Is it time?" she asked. No one answered. There was only the sound of the sea through the lattice window, whispering against the stones. She rose without protest, wrapped herself in her robe, and followed. The eunuchs led her through the narrow corridors toward the garden gate that opened onto the water. Lanterns swayed in the wind, their flames thin and trembling. Each step was slower than the last. Beyond the gate, the Bosphorus waited, black, endless, indifferent. The night air was heavy with salt and something else. Finality. The small boat rocked against the pier, its oarsmen cloaked in silence, faces half hidden by the folds of their hoods. The eunuchs helped her step aboard, their hands trembling though their expressions never changed. She sat where they placed her, her robe fluttering in the wind, her eyes fixed not on the men but on the faint shimmer of dawn gathering in the east. Across the water, the palace domes gleamed faintly, their silhouettes cut from shadow and grief. Somewhere within those walls, the Sultan sat alone, his fingers tracing the rim of a cup gone cold. He did not watch her departure. He could not, whether by his mother's counsel or his own wearied surrender. The choice had been made, and choices once made in the Ottoman court were as irreversible as death. The boat drifted into the center of the strait. The Bosphorus stretched wide and dark around them, swallowing the echoes of their movement. The velvet sack lay folded beside her, its fabric rich and immaculate, its purpose merciless. Tradition demanded it. A noble death, bloodless, discreet, sparing the Sultan the stain of execution by the sword. A gesture of mercy, they called it. But mercy, she thought, should not have to suffocate. One of the eunuchs stepped forward, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. She did not resist when they lifted the sack, its weight brushing against her cheek like a farewell caress. The water lapped against the hull, steady and patient. She whispered a prayer, not for salvation, but for remembrance. Let someone, someday, remember she had lived, she had loved, she had sung. The sack was lowered gently over her. The fabric muffled her breath, her voice, her final heartbeat. A moment later, the boat tilted slightly as a splash broke the surface. Ripples spread outward, vanishing into the dark. The oarsmen bowed their heads. The sea accepted her without protest, and by sunrise, the Bosphorus was calm again, as though it had never taken anything at all. When dawn finally touched the palace walls, it arrived without warmth. The courtyards of Topkapi were still, their fountains frozen mid-song. Servants moved cautiously, uncertain if they were permitted to breathe too loudly. The harem had already learned what had happened, though no word was spoken. They saw in the eunuchs' faces, pale and hollow, in the absence of favorites' laughter echoing through the marble halls. Her chambers had been stripped before sunrise, her silks divided, her perfumes poured away into the gardens as offering. Only the faint trace of jasmine lingered in the air, clinging stubbornly to the stones. In the Sultan's private quarters, the same silence reigned. He had not eaten, He had not spoken. The Valide Sultan, seated opposite him, read from the Quran in a low, measured tone, her eyes never leaving the page. She did not look at her son, and he did not look at her. Between them, incense curled upward, slow, suffocating, relentless. Outside, the Bosphorus shimmered beneath the morning sun, concealing its crime beneath beauty. Historians would later write that the Sultan became distant in the months that followed. His laughter vanished. The music of the palace grew softer, the festivals fewer. He walked the gardens alone at dusk, listening to the fountains as though waiting for a voice to return from beneath the water. His court learned to avoid speaking of love, of music, of foreign lands. Even the poets, who once sang of beauty and devotion, turned their words toward war and piety. The empire itself seemed to hold its breath, as if grieving in secret for a woman it was forbidden to mourn. Yet in the quiet corners of the harem, the story survived. In glances exchanged, in lullabies whispered to newborns, in the trembling of hands when the sea's wind reached the lattice windows. The empire had silenced her name, but silence could not erase memory. It only buried it deeper where it would endure. Weeks bled into months, and the rhythm of palace life resumed, or pretended to. The Valide Sultan received ambassadors with a calm so precise it seemed rehearsed. Dinners were held, music returned in fragments, and laughter echoed once more through the gilded halls. But beneath the ceremonies, the air was hollow. The Sultan spoke less with each passing day. His eyes, once bright with command, now lingered on the horizon when he sat beside the sea. Some said he was haunted. Others said he had learned, finally, the true solitude of power. In the harem, the women who had once envied the favorite now feared her memory. At night, they whispered that her spirit drifted along the Bosphorus, her song rising from the water when the wind changed. The older concubines crossed themselves with quiet superstition, warning the younger ones never to gaze too long into the waves. Yet when the moon was high and the palace lanterns flickered, some swore they saw her reflection, a face pale as dawn, eyes open, unblinking, waiting. The Sultan's servants began to speak of strange moments. Once, as he walked the rose garden, he paused before the fountain where she had once sung. He stood there until the candles burned low, his lips moving without sound. On another night, he ordered a velvet curtain torn down, saying its color reminded him of something he could no longer bear. Those who served closest to him learned to avert their eyes when he grew still, as though the memory itself had entered the room. Outside the palace, the empire went on, conquests, decrees, festivals. The people did not know her name, only that the Sultan's mood had turned to stone. The poets who dared to write a forbidden love cloaked their verses in allegory, speaking of stars that fell into the sea and could not return. Even the Bosphorus, they said, grew quieter that year, its current slower, as though mourning with him. And through it all, her absence lived like a presence, invisible, unspoken, but felt by every soul who passed beneath those domes. It was as if the empire itself carried her ghost, tucked beneath its silks, humming softly beneath the sound of power. Years passed, and the empire changed its face, as empires always do. New sultans rose, new wars were fought, new names were etched into marble and forgotten just as swiftly. Yet the story of the drowned favorite refused to die. It lingered in the shadows of the palace, in the quiet tremor of the Bosphorus at dawn, in the way servants hesitated before pouring rose water into the basins. Her name, once forbidden, became a secret share like contraband, spoken softly in the baths, in the weaving rooms, in the hearts of those who knew what it meant to love without power. Travelers began to carry the tale beyond Istanbul. Sailors swore that on still nights, when the moon turned the sea to silver, a woman's voice could be heard beneath the water, a lament so soft it could break a man's sleep. Poets wove her sorrow into verses disguised as fables. Painters from distant lands painted her face, though none had ever seen her. In Venice and Paris, whispers of the Sultan's drowned mistress mingled with the scent of tobacco and sea salt, growing more beautiful and tragic with each retelling. Historians argue even now about who she truly was: a Georgian slave girl, a Tatar concubine, a queen in all but title. Some records suggest her name was Ice. Others call her Nadia, or Melite, or nothing at all. Perhaps she never existed as one woman, but as 100 whose stories were swallowed by the same sea. Yet the legend persists because truth alone cannot explain it. What endures is not the fact of her death, but the echo of her defiance, the quiet grace with which she walked toward her fate. They say that when the tide is high and the palace lanterns shimmer across the water, you can still see a faint shimmer of velvet below the surface. Not a ghost, but a memory refusing to rest. Centuries later, the empire itself fell, its banners lowered, its palaces turned to museums of silence. Yet even as the Ottoman grandeur crumbled into history, her story endured, not as a line in the chronicles, but as a whisper threaded to the fabric of memory. Guides leading tourists through Topkapi still pause before the windows that face the Bosphorus, their voices lowering, as if the sea itself might overhear. They tell the Sultan's favorite, who was drowned in velvet, a beauty too bright for her world, undone by love and power in equal measure. Some laugh nervously, others grow quiet, sensing that behind the legend there is something uncomfortably human, the weight of being seen, then erased. The sea remains unchanged. The same waters that swallowed her have carried empires and ghosts alike, washing away the footsteps of conquerors, the cries of forgotten, the dreams of those who mistook affection for safety. Each wave that breaks against the shore seems to carry her story anew, reshaping it for those willing to listen. In the evenings, when the call to prayer drifts over the city and the gulls circle above the domes, it feels as if time itself pauses, remembering her. For the Sultan, history records no confession, no word of regret. His reign continued, his decrees preserved in ink that has not yet faded. But legend insists that in his final years, he refused to sleep near the water, that he ordered his chambers moved inland, away from the sound of the waves. Perhaps he feared the voice beneath them. Perhaps he heard her song still, the song of a woman who had once been his solace, his undoing and his reflection. And so the tale endures, not bound by the empire that silenced her, nor by the historians who question her truth. It lives in the hush between prayer and tide, in the shiver of the night wind that crosses the Bosphorus. Her body may have drowned, but her name became the one thing the empire could never bury. Even now, the sea remembers,